1, 2, 3. Okay, back into it. There's a 10-year-old food forest up there. 10 years. Subtropics, northern New South Wales. The tree in the middle is a Tipuana tipu, pride of Bolivia. Fantastic trees. Great. A really nice long-term legume. Will grow from a coppice, so you can knock it down, it will come back. Loses all its leaves in the dry season, puts them back on in about 10 days. I decided a while ago to go around and take a photograph of every one of the largest of every type of tree that I'm interested in whenever I see it. I've missed a few over the years, and I'm never going to miss one again, I hope. Got the largest ginkgo biloba I've ever seen in New Orleans, walking around the suburbs. Amazing what you see walking around the suburbs. They're a little research project themselves. Loads of happy little accidents and sad little failures. I've seen these, Tipuana tipu, biggest ones I've ever saw, Buenos Aires, street trees in Buenos Aires, trunks like this. They are from South America. It's called the pride of Bolivia as a common name, but that's its Latin name. Great name, Tipuana tipu, 2 words. Saw some out at Cunnamulla in Western Queensland. There's one in the street there next to the post office. I saw one in Sidi Ifni in the northern Sahara of Morocco. I didn't get to photograph those ones. I was stupid. I didn't get to photograph those in Buenos Aires, but the biggest ones I've got since are in Cairo Zoo. You get big trees in zoos. I think it's all the diverse manures that are thrown around. But yeah, I'm always looking for the largest avocado, the largest carob, the largest mango. Largest mango I've photographed so far is in Palm Woods. There's 2 there that are 100 years old, plus. Largest jackfruit in Australia, oldest jackfruit in Australia is at Boreen Point. It's huge. It's about 200 kilos. At least 200 kilos of jackfruit a year. 500 kilos of jackfruit's a good jackfruit, they reckon, in India. I think you should do it. I think you should photograph the largest of the classic trees you see. They may be going, I think. We need to know how big trees can get. You can kind of age an area by trees too. You go into the Peruvian Amazon and there's all these mangoes that are about 80 or 90 years old at the oldest. And all mangoes come from India. And then the most diverse of any tropical fruit tree. There's about 800 mangoes. Nothing like the temperate climate trees. You've got 2,000 to 4,000 apples. So, yeah, it's kind of neat going around taking pictures of the largest of the trees that you see. And that's a 10-year-old tipu. And there's about 48 varieties of fruit tree in that food forest. And it's time-stacked its way into stability. Most of the faster growing, short-lived pioneers are out. Some of them are sort of stunted and growing underneath a little bit, but they're insignificant. The tipu is the largest in there of the long-term legumes. It's the 5 acres at Tagari Farm, at Bill's old property. That was the view from the kitchen. And I lived there for 3.5 years, and that was what we used to look at quite a lot. And there was a lot to learn in there. You couldn't work out all the connections that were going on. It functioned exactly like a normal forest, but it was an assembly of species that would never naturally actually occur. But it functioned exactly like a forest, and all the wildlife used it like a forest. And waves of birds would come through, canopy birds and birds in the understory and birds on the bark and ground birds, and whole layers of birds would come through cooperating as a wave. At about 11 o'clock most of the time there'd be the first wave come through. Even got a bush turkey move in, and then we played around and displaced the bush turkey with 3 or 4 chickens. We figured once there was a bush turkey, it was a sort of indication that we'd handle a couple of chickens here and there, and there were all these sort of indicators of natural functions that were happening. It was a very interesting thing to sort of try and understand. No chance you could really understand it. One thing for sure, it was definitely building soil. No question about that. And I remember it. I had a bit of a relationship with this food forest because I used to go down and visit Bill, and he was putting this thing together. I always remember the first time I went down to have a look at what he was doing. And I was so shocked what he was doing. I really felt bad, actually. I felt like kicking my own ass. I looked at what he's doing, and I thought, he doesn't give a shit how much he's putting in there. He's doing what I've always thought I should have done, but I was too scared to do. He's stacking all this stuff in there, and he doesn't care whether it's a legume or it isn't a legume. As long as it chucks mulch out, he's going to cut it and drop it and get vicious with it and get all the stuff up he wants up. And it was just rampant tree planting madness. And it looked like so much fun. And I wanted to do that, and the systems I was putting in was so simple. And they were trying to become more diverse in front of me. They were trying to grow sweet potato. Sweet potato invaded my garden by accident with mulch I brought in and put ground cover out. He put sweet potato down so thick, I sat down in that garden on another visit when it was about 4 years old, and just back from that Tipuana Tipu, I sat down on the ground in an ocean of sweet potato with my bum on the ground. The sweet potato was up to my shoulder. It looked like rampant madness. And I thought, the old bastard's lost it. There's no chance he's going to get away from this sweet potato. But he was out there with a sharp machete, whacking off a few bits, rough as guts. He kept it so untidy, on purpose, I'm sure, just for contention. Because I got to maintain it later, and if you did systematically go round it, you could get it kind of quite presentable. But Bill purposely kept it looking really untidy, and people would turn up, and as soon as there's the slightest bit of criticism, he'd just dismiss them, right? With having great fun with it all, right? And it was kind of a great... I mean, we can't all do that, but it was a proof that you didn't have to have it completely ordered. From total disorder comes natural order. And at that stage, it was a classic forest, absolutely classic. And it had an understory of coffee that we got to maintain. In the subtropics, coffee is an understory. And there you are down in the coffee. And over 1 acre of food forest, we would harvest 40 kilos of coffee. We got to harvest it and process it and drink it. And later on, I worked in coffee madness in Central Highlands of Vietnam, which was just totally destructive landscape of coffee monoculture. And I got to understand coffee quite a lot. In northern New South Wales, they grow supposedly some of the world's best gourmet coffee now. But, you plant coffee at, nearly just less than a metre apart in the row, just over a metre apart between the rows. You have to, if you're not organic, you have to spray lots of herbicide. If you are organic, you have to fight the weeds like mad. You have to put 600 to 800 grams of fertiliser every 4 to 6 weeks in the growing season, or 6 to 8 weeks depending on the rainfall. You have to work quite hard with all those inputs. Your coffee trees can grow from 20 to 60 years. They get into full production on the 3rd to 5th year, depending on how well they're growing. They produce up to 3 kilos of coffee per tree. But you have all that work and all those inputs. We had free coffee. We had no inputs. We didn't have to weed. We didn't have to fertilise. We didn't have to water. And we got 1.5 to 2 kilos per tree. So we didn't get as much per tree, but we got 40 kilos of free coffee. We did have to pick. You can expect that. You know, and every 2 to 3 years we'd have to prune them a little bit. That was a bit of mulching, really, a bit of machete maintenance. And I came to the conclusion that coffee is actually a byproduct of diverse food forests in the subtropics. That's all it is. It's as simple as that. It's a free byproduct of a good food forest in the subtropics. It's not a monocultural destructive system trendily promoted by Starbucks. Coffee goes past oil on the commodity market in the world now. We're in a coffee culture. There's lots and lots of nightmares of coffee production out there. Where I was working in Vietnam, 15 years before, one of our students, one of our indigenous, what they call one of the minorities, it's horrible, isn't it? They're an ethnic minority. Her mother used to nag her about, when she was going to school, just be really, really careful about the tigers. It wasn't a bloody tree as far as the eye could see, apart from on a mountain in the distance, and you could see the edge of the deforestation going. There was, just 9 months before I was there, they saw the last of the Asian hippopotamus in the river. The river was running red like blood, the colour of the subsoil, not the topsoil. The topsoil under that forest was black, 2 inches of black. The subsoil was red. You go into the national parks in the Central Highlands, the water's running as clear as gin. All for coffee. And they call jackfruit, there's a jackfruit on the right there, in the right-hand corner. They call jackfruit meat in Vietnam.
Soil erosion in the areas that you're talking is 250 tonnes per hectare per year. That's in suspension.
Easy. They shipped 1 million people into that Lam-Ha district in 15 years, from river deltas and the Red River in the north and the Mekong Delta in the south. Poor people with an instruction, well, what do? Get in there and chop it down and plant a cash crop. And this is free coffee from doing this. So what have you got in one of these food forests? Let's just think about it without getting into detail, because that's the way to get there.
Jeff, what happened to the sweet potato, the excess sweet potato?
I'm going there now, right? Don't name it. A minute. What I'm trying to tell you all the time is stop getting into the details till you understand the basic patterns. Remember the 2 faces? And when you named it as 2 faces or a vase? Stop that a minute. Come back from that amount of academics. You have climax trees at the top. Let's think about layers. Climax. Understory. You have shrubs. You have herbs. You have clumping plants or clumpers. Here on the ground you have ground cover. You have root crop or root yield plants. And then going up here, you have climbers, vertical layers. You have layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers. Stop thinking about the plants, what genus they are, what Latin name they are, what type they are, when they yield or whatever. Just think layers like your basic patterns. Get into that later. That all gets interesting later. Don't worry about that stuff. Just look with your eye, without your brain a minute, right? And see the layers of a forest. That's what gives it the stability. That's what gives you the key to establishment. If you're in the temperate zone like here, you have 2 layers of herbs. Tall and short herbs, because you're in a herbaceous flux in the temperate zone. If you're in the tropics, you have understory palms. And you also have emergent palms at the top. Or tall palms, let's call them, stick at the top. You have 2 layers of palms in the wet tropics. In the wet tropics, it's a palm forest. It's almost 50% palms, right on the equator. So you have these layers of forest. As it gets established, the ground cover just moves to the outside edge. It's round the outside. If there's any of these, remember, so this is your layers in physical. This is your stacking. This is your time stack. This is them switching around. It is complicated. It's not too complicated to understand. It's very interesting to try and understand. You may never understand it all, but you can understand the general theme and function of establishment. And you will have to vary it to your location, your landscape and your climate. And you'll need to pin it down a little bit, but you can see all these examples around. You can see it in the natural environment. If you look at the lantana and the recovery through the lantana in the subtropics, you'll see it in stages. If you look through the blackberry, you'll see it in stages. If you look through the broom or the gorse, you'll see it in stages. You won't see it if you're angry about that plant. It's hard to see it then. So even these small trees at the end, it's really only those long-term legumes here, that bottom one. It's only those that end up growing with the fruit trees or the productive trees. All of these, all this time stack above, and probably not even the cover crop. That is your manipulation. That's totally yours. That probably will not ever come back unless you want it to. This section in here, the bushes, the shrubs, the small trees, and the medium-sized legume trees, they're only on the outside edge. The inside is solid. And once it gets to a certain stage, you can walk away. If you want to, you can walk away. And you can't stop it. It'll go on its own. It may not go past the full lifespan of the tree. The trees, it will change a bit. But generally, it will go for many years without any maintenance. I know, because we've actually done that little experiment a bit too. That forest up there, I estimate that you could walk away from that acre for 10 years, do nothing. Walk away for 10 years. And one man with a machete would get it back in maintenance in 2 days. Because it's just machete maintenance when you get into a certain stage. It's just, you're just like a big leaf cutter ant. Just come in and whop off a bit of mulch with a sharp hand tool. Very, very, very efficient. Extremely efficient. The amount of energy into, the amount of energy out. And that hand tool you're using has an incredibly efficient energy in relation to the energy of manufacture extended over the lifetime of the product. And you talk to a lot of people about these sort of systems, and I think are these diverse, productive forests where humans live. This is where we naturally live. This is your habitat. And whether you like it or not, you subliminally live in there. Look at any suburb. After they build the houses, they plant trees. And over a period of time, the trees go up and up and up and up and up. Very interesting. I was working in Boulder, Colorado, and out in the prairie comes up to the Rocky Mountains there and the Flatirons at Denver, Boulder, Colorado, and people say, trees never grew on the prairie. I think that's bullshit, actually. I think it was about 40% trees, but in the gullies especially. They're just not counting the amount of cattle and horses they drove through the place. But still, there are suburbs being built away from Denver and away from Boulder. We've kind of got the Rockies here going up and away, and the prairie going out like that, and here's Denver. And the suburbs are getting further and further away. As long as you can see the mountains, they're willing to keep building further and further out. And as you go out, the suburbs get newer and newer and newer. So as you drive back, you're driving back in time of established suburbs. And the trees get higher and higher and higher and higher and higher until when you get back to Denver, you're in like a forested suburb. And here you can see people planting trees. They may not be fruit trees, but they are trees. We all do it. Doesn't matter how expensive the suburb is, we do it. You can go to a favela in Brazil, and a favela is a ghetto around a city, and it's an incredible phenomena. 1,000 families take over some land on the edge of town overnight. 1,000 families cooperate together, and they move in and they take over, and they all take a block of land, 50 metres by 50 metres roughly, and they all agree to cooperate and settle, and they have to build a house frame overnight in the cover of darkness, and then they protect it, and they often offer their vote to a crooked politician, and there's a law that if they hold it for a certain amount of time, they get it as a favela. So these suburbs, these ghettos appear overnight. I don't know how you organise 1,000 families to move all at once. I think you need an Uzi, AK-47 or something. But anyway, they do it, and they lay out the streets, and they lay out this little suburb, and they move in. It's around every Brazilian town and city, and I'm really interested in those working with people in poor situations. So I spend a bit of time in favelas. But when you see an older favela, eventually it gets concreted and they all get little Besser block buildings. It becomes a barrio then. And then electricity comes on and water comes on and things, you know. All these trees go up. And you see one 4 or 5 years old. Now they are all fruit trees because poor people plant fruit trees. Right? And they're all trees. And the whole thing turns into trees. You're very secure when most of your food comes from trees. Very long-term yield. Like Bill talking about the chestnuts there. One of the largest trees in the Amazon is the castanha, the Brazil nut. And the Brazil nut is a giant tree to about 60 metres, and the Brazil nut comes in a great big nut. It's about that big. It's like a coconut. And inside that, there are about 13 Brazil nuts, like you know. They're all sort of like segments of a mandarin inside of there. This is a really big wooden cask. So there's 13 nuts in there, like you know, Brazil nuts. And every part of the tree is useful. The bark is useful for a medicinal. This cask, you knock a hole in the cask, get the nuts, shake the nuts out, and then put boiling water in the cask and use it for another medicinal use. But it's said that 13 Brazil nuts, if you eat 13 Brazil nuts every day, drink some good water or drink water, eat 13 Brazil nuts, you won't starve. It's a reasonably good whole food as a survival food. One tree, one big castanha, one Brazil nut, has 1,000 of those. That's food security for 3 years, or food security for 3 people for 1 year, every year, from one tree. And that's how it is with large trees or with food security coming from trees. So, if you want to get people, if you want to conquer people, the strategy is, and always has been, go in and cut the food forest down, go in and cut the trees down. You got them. Because your security really is in these large, sustainable, long-term forested systems. Because this is very, very stable. You see olive trees in the Middle East that are 2,000 years old being removed, bulldozed or target practiced. This is a very important side of looking at sustainability. And if we need to realise that in every climate we can lay down systems like this, and almost in every climate you end up in the same situation in the end of maintenance with very low-tech equipment required and a very long-term stable yield. And if we can get systems up that last 2,000 years, we're doing pretty good. That'll get us out of a lot of trouble. So it's more or less the same sort of regimes of understanding the way things pioneer and the way things establish over damaged ground. That's what will get you to understand how to get all these fancy forest systems up. Actually going out of your way to think like that about layers, to install the layers, which also will include the habitat. When you look at systems, even when you look at gardens, you'll notice with landscape gardens, just look at them from a point of view of layers, forget what's in the garden, and look at an ornamental landscape and say, well, how many layers are in there? Are there just climax trees? If so, there's just one layer. And you'll find there's a lot of maintenance and it's reasonably unstable. If there's climax trees and ground cover, it'll be a little bit more stable. If there's climax trees, understory and ground cover, it'll be a little bit more stable again. If you don't have at least 3 layers through a system, it's quite unstable and it'll be changing and it'll take quite a lot of maintenance to hold it in that condition. So you can think the same way about old growth systems. If you've already got old growth up and there's the understory's gone for whatever reason, grazing, fire, climate damage or whatever. Right? It's a matter of saying, okay, this layer's missing, that layer's missing. What species do I need to install that'll take up those positions? Right? And whether you like it or not, that will bring in other environmental influences in the form of habitat. So you can also speed it up by putting in habitat, right? Encouraging animals in, encouraging species in. Like you can put in species that attract pigeons around your forests, as in timber forests. You can put in bird attractant species, particularly berries that pigeons eat, around the outside, and they'll fly in all sorts of nutrient and fly in other seeds for you as well. Local seed, native seed. If you already have an established orchard, if you've got something like this that's a conventionally spaced out monoculture of trees, then quite often you'll be looking at, okay, what is a track through here that doesn't hit too many trees, that is on contour as something that I can establish either as a water harvesting contour or something that also lines up with access and interplant in between. And diversify this planning with other support species. Someone asked me just before break about that. And you start to fit in your layers. When you look in at ground level, your fruit trees, if you've got the same species of fruit tree in here, or same species of tree in here as some sort of monoculture, and there's immediately you start to look at, okay, what do I need that is a useful ground cover? And it might not be that easy to put in the ground cover you want, so you may have to start off with a pioneer ground cover, like a cover crop. May actually mean you have to do something that conditions the ground to receive a cover crop ground cover to start with, and then once that's established, put in a more permanent, perennial type of ground cover. Once you have that ground cover and you have somewhat of a control on the top layer of the soil, because it's often the grasses, if there's grass in a conventional orchard like there often is, you've got a complete dominance in that top layer of soil, and it's not easy to introduce other species of trees. And from there on you start to bring in your pioneers again in that sort of time stack. You may have to adjust the type of trees that you've got. You may have to adjust the type of time stack of legumes in relation to the age of these trees that are in. And then also the diversification of fruit trees or productive trees that you're putting in amongst all this. So it's a staged version of the establishment in open ground. And then you also may be in a situation where some of the not so good trees in amongst it might have to be removed because you want to diversify. Not always. Sometimes you can work with every single tree that's there. Who was it asked me that? Yeah. So it's a sort of compromise. You can go in and heavily mulch around these with paper and deep mulches, more effort than you would normally do. That gives you an island to plan onto with your ground covers, and off that island of mulch and ground covers you can start to establish your diverse mix of time stack and physical layers. So it's not much different. In some ways it's easier than bare ground because you have a sort of island of planting already. You're going to establish around that area, which you have a reason to heavily mulch to support the trees that are already there, and you grow off that island, and you turn that one tree into a clump of trees. You guys ever heard of the chicken dome? Anybody heard of chicken domes? Yeah? Astrodome? Yeah? Now these are Astro Chooks. A lot of you haven't heard of chicken dome. Linda Woodrow, permaculture home gardening. Makes it a little bit more difficult, but I'll explain it to you. Linda Woodrow, up at Kyogle, she lives at Kyogle, northern New South Wales, inland from where we live. She's written this great little book called Permaculture Home Gardening, and she uses a system, she uses a chicken tractor. Right? Now, I expect everybody's heard about chicken tractors. There are different forms of chicken tractor where you can have a stationary set of gardens. You have a shed. There are many patterns, but let's say we have an open straw yard run and a set of gardens, and we cycle the chickens from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I had one of these once, 7, like this, and you go 2 weeks in that one, 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 or 3 weeks, and by the time they come back, this veggie garden's already produced and it's ready to cycle the chickens across it. So this is it's almost a sort of permaculture dogma, like the herb spiral banana circle and those sort of things. It's a gated chicken system where you cycle the chickens over the veggie gardens. The chickens love to dig, they love to scratch, they love to eat seed, they love to shred the mulch, right? And they prepare everything, and then you move them out, straighten it up a bit, add a bit of extra mulch on top and plant your veggies. 20 weeks later, you bring them back to tidy it all back up for you when the veggies are finished after they've gone through the other beds, and if you've got time left over, you leave them in here just processing mulch for you. That's a simple explanation of a chicken tractor. Now that's a stationary chicken tractor. You also get chicken tractors that move, and often people have made them as little A-frames like this, and you have a little chicken house and a wire mesh on the other end and a couple of handles like this and a door at the back or something to get your eggs out, and you move this chicken tractor across the ground. Right. And Daniel Columbia there, he'd tell you a lot about it. He'd used goats across his landscape and cleaned up and nibbled down the kikuyu, then solarized the ground with plastic sheets to burn the kikuyu roots, and then chicken tractored with heavy chickens over that stressed kikuyu and veggie garden behind. The goats never came back, the plastic never came back, but the chickens continuously moved around his garden bed, cleaning up gardens that were finished and preparing the oncoming garden. So this is a chicken tractor. Well, Linda Woodrow came up with a system of using a dome, and she made a chicken tractor out of electrical conduit, which I think is all hidden in this building, but it's that white tubing that your electric wires go through in a house. PVC conduit, yeah. And in her book there's a whole plan of how to make one of these, but it's sort of 3 circles with a like this, and it's covered in mesh, and there's a grid hanging up on the inside for the chickens to perch on. There's a plastic tarp over the top. In Australia they're often blue, over the top of it to keep them shaded. And that's pegged out like a tent. There's an interesting door, and people make them in different materials. Sometimes we've made them out of shade cloth, like a shade cloth tunnel tied up like the end of a lolly, and you turn it round and put it in. You want to get a photograph up? I'll show you a photograph of one, that'll make it a lot easier. And the wire mesh hangs out a bit like this, off the edge, overlapping, and you have about between 8 and 12 chickens in there, depending on the size of the breed of chickens, and you move it around veggie gardens. And it leaves a circular processed piece of ground prepared by the chickens that you can garden in. Right? And Linda wrote a book, Diversity Farm. Yeah. And Linda wrote a book about this, and she put like a keyhole garden footpath in and gardened around a whole system of circular gardens. And this is quite a large, this is 3.5 metres across here, diameter across a circle.
You've got to just turn the top lights off and pull that top board down.
Yeah. And I had great success with this, both growing vegetables but also growing forest. The interesting thing about a dome is it's the largest area you can encapsulate with the minimum amount of structure. That's one of the features of a dome. We actually made one in Vietnam out of irrigation pipe. Made one in Guatemala out of bamboo, very traditional looking. But what I did was I put the chicken dam down on the ground on just a grass paddock with 10 big Rhode Island Reds inside. They completely, near enough, bare soiled it in a week. Then I put down, while the chickens were still there, I filled it with mulch, almost a metre deep. The chickens loved that because the mulch was straight off the paddock and it was full of seed, and they're digging their way through it. So about a week to 10 days, they almost bare soiled the grass. Then I'd fill it up with straw, so it'd be up to here with straw and actually slashings off the paddock. And then about 10 days to 2 weeks after that, I'd move them over and plant this to a food forest. And what happened was, when you looked back along the ground, you could see, if this is the landscape they've been on, here they are here, and where they just were, you can still see quite a lot of mulch, and there's just tiny little things, and maybe one fruit tree, a couple of smaller trees, one or two little legume trees, and a few things popping out of the ground. Then there it is on bare ground. Then where it was, this is where it was, say, 3 weeks before. 6 weeks before, it's already looking like this. 9 weeks before, it's looking like this. 12 weeks before, it's looking like this. 15 weeks before, you can already see that that's the pioneers, and the fruit trees are starting to come out of the pioneers. And it's marching across the landscape, leaving a forest behind it, leaving a food forest behind it. The rampancy is incredible what happens, because this, on that circle, on that, in here, I'd put, this is what I put down. And remember, I get a bit carried away with overstacking. I got accused of having shares in the nurseries at one time. But you got 3 fruit trees. I put in 4 legume trees. I put in 50 legume shrub seeds. I put in 20 root divisions, like comfrey, arrowroot, cassava, and things like that. That's a stationary chicken tractor up there. It's got a forest growing on the outside of it. And then I'd put in 100 sweet potato cuttings. Yeah, yeah. It's understating it, actually. I put in quite a lot more than that. I just can't remember it all. I'm really into just put it in, cover it up. You can't plant it 5 years later. You can't plant it 1 year later. You can't buy it. You can't do it. No matter how wealthy you are, you can't do it. You can do it from the beginning. You can always cut it out. You can always chop it out. It's so cheap. It's so much more efficient. It's so much less work to overstack it than it is to understack it. And very unusual things happened as well. Because we used to also put our veggie scraps in there. This one here, you can see here, we're just planning this up with students. You can see the one behind as a huge volunteer growth of pumpkins. I didn't plant any pumpkins. The pumpkins came out of our vegetable scraps. The one that the students are stood next to there, got that one. We're just planting it there. It doesn't look like much at that stage, but that produced 12 kilos of volunteer cucumbers. They came out of the veggie scraps. We just happen to eat mostly organic food that comes from non-hybrid crops. So the crops grow from the seed true to strain. So our food scraps were growing our garden. It was just part of the sort of evolution of the system. That's some of our chooks there. Big Rhode Island Reds. And they're in amongst the mulch there, and they're processing it down. They're manuring it, they're shredding it, they're taking out all the seeds. They're breaking all the pest cycles and in their larval stage. So it's pretty clean, fertile, prepared, ready to go, and it's going to grow like mad. Here we are. You can see the garden in the foreground and the garden in the background. So that is another way that you can prepare ground by moving animals across it and leaving the forest behind it. And it was so regularly moved that it was almost I think it was 100% success. There wasn't one circle we left behind that failed, and there wasn't one circle left behind that needed any maintenance. Chickens loved it. They love doing that. They love scratching. That's their whole life.
How many chickens go at 3 meters?
Sorry?
How many chickens go at 3 meters?
Depends on the size of the chickens and the age of the chickens, actually. But, about 12 smaller chickens or 8 large chickens, fine. Large chickens are good because they're good diggers. Depends how solid your ground is a bit too. There's a few variables in there. It's not exactly clear cut. But the thing is, from that move, there was no fiddly maintenance. The next set of maintenance is not bending over maintenance. It's like, maybe you've got a pair of secateurs go, I'll take these pigeon peas off and throw them at that fruit tree. Or I'll just whack these off with a sharp knife. These support species can now be mulched. They're sacrificial. Dump them down there. It's all stood up maintenance. It's none of this, pick these weeds out or anything like that. It's like walk up and whack it off, chuck it at the fruit tree, walk away. It's seconds. You can cut a bale of mulch off a coppice tree in less than a minute with a machete, and you're not even bending over. On a good pollarded tree in a food forest, you can cut it at this height, right? And it's your umbrella and shade in the dry season. It's shading you and the system. Right? And you can just whack it off with a machete and a huge volume comes down. Go out with a little knife or a sickle and try and cut a bale of herbaceous mulch. See how much work that is. Or even use one of these lawn mowers, which is a totally unsustainable tool compared to a hand tool. The pollution of manufacture extended over the lifetime of a mechanised tool like a whippersnipper or a lawnmower is not a very good energy audit compared to a hand tool. But the amount of work you have to do and the amount of pollution you have to you create to get a bale of mulch in volume compared to cutting it from coppice. Not necessarily. It depends on, in the tropics, definitely not, hardly at all. And as it gets cooler, you have to cut it up a little bit more. But remember that you're cutting your stick mulch in the temperate climate at the end of summer. so it rots over the wet winter. You're cutting your herbaceous mulch at the start of summer and in the middle of summer in the temperate, and you're cutting your stick mulch at the end of summer when you want to let the light in. Remember, technique, 1 dimension. Strategy, 2 dimension, involves time in relation to the landscape profile and climate. So that when you ask me that question, I have to know which climate you're in. If you're in the temperate zone, you're cutting at a different time of year to the tropical zone. Just think carefully about when you're relieving, letting that sunlight in, because as Bill said earlier, a lot of the plants are saturated with light. Right? So when it's cloudy, at the start of the cloudy time, at the time when there's less light saturation, is when you can open it up. Until then, shade it over. Take the pressure off. You have an attitude that you want to create a sustainable system that is productive per square metre and sustainable forever over time. We need a 2,000-year-old system now. It's not a trophy hunter mentality where you want production per tree. Yes, I can produce 3 kilos of coffee on every coffee bush in full sun, weeding it continuously or spraying it continuously with herbicide, watering it in the dry season and putting 600 to 800 grams of organic fertiliser down every 6 to 8 weeks in the growing season. Or I can grow coffee for nothing, doing nothing. But I only get 1.5 kilos to 2 kilos off a tree. What's better? 1.5 to 2 kilos with no input as a byproduct of the food forest, or working your ass off and poisoning the ground and degrading the place to get an extra kilo per bush. Who's clever? Who's, and in the long term, who's still there? One's 2,000 years old, the other one's gone. It's just a trendy little coffee plantation. So that's the way you have to think about the systems. Right, back on the questions. Would fast composting of a human body destroy any human pathogens in the corpse? Who's this? Yes. Yeah, it'll all be gone. Oh, yeah, you wouldn't even know what it was.
Just an idea we were talking about last night.
In Kew Gardens in London, there is a grapevine that's over 150 feet long. Right? By the way, all these pruning of grapevines and pruning of vines, it's all about convenience of harvest, growing vines on funny little trellises across fields. That's all silly agricultural stuff, right? Grapevines produce a lot more when they're 150 foot long, obviously. Funny how many people ask you that. Do you have to prune grapevines, Do they produce more if you prune them? No, they produce more when they're hundreds of foot long. You just got to feed them more because it's a bigger thing. It's like, I don't know, we get really locked up with stuff, But that grapevine, they used to put a horse on it every year.
Okay, but different with your humans because you've got...
Yeah, but I'm just saying it's not about the pathogens, it's about the decomposition rate I'm going to explain. They had a shallow pit, right? And there was millions of horses in London, right? Quite a few million, as they were in most cities around the 18th century and turn of the century. And they had a lot of dead ones. And, it's like if you ever had like a dead cow or a dead horse, it's quite a disposal problem. They're even hard to drag around. So they used a shallow pit, dump a horse in there, lying on its side, cover it with great big thick mulch a metre deep, and that grapevine would eat it. And they'd do it every year. Now, with a human body, right, you'd have to make sure it was in the centre of a large heap. Be careful, obviously. I've composted a goat, right, inside 3 cubic metres. Right? I've composted all kinds of things, lots of carpet snakes, lots of frogmouth owls, because you get them as roadkills, lots of roadkills, lots of echidnas, they're interesting. As they break down, they take a long time with the spines, and on about the 10th day, all of a sudden the spines, you don't think they're going to go. The skeleton's gone, the flesh is gone, everything's gone more or less, you can't find it. Everything's all the same colour, can't see the bone structure, and all these spines are not going to go. And then all of a sudden, on about the 10th day, they all go black and furry, and the next turn, they're gone. It's gone in. It's just integrated. You know, so no reason a body's a body, and once you've taken it through that full process, it's locked into the carbons. So it's a nitrogen-carbon ratio of 30 to 1 part nitrogen, 30 parts carbon, and carbon has sponged it in. So you've taken the explosive action of nitrogen, which is just going to explode away from it or evaporate in the air as nitrous oxide, right? You've locked it up in the carbon and stretched it out. It's a loaves and fishes job.
How many days for a human body?
No reason why it wouldn't go in 18 days if you had the right system, but, you know, like, I don't know who's going to turn it over now.
It just seemed like a better idea than cremation last night.
Yeah.
So then you come back a year later and celebrate, you know.
Crystal Waters, they're putting people in with a post-hole borer. They post-hole bore down, and they wrap you up like this, put you in feet first, and your head's about a metre down, and then they plant the fruit tree of choice on the top.
They're starting them in Christchurch, and back in New Zealand on the foothills to regenerate national bush.
Yeah.
National graveyard. So
It's something we've noticed all over the world, that graveyards are very fertile. And in arid landscape in the Middle East, you notice that any trees planted in graveyards, Muslim graveyards, people are buried quite shallow, no gravestones, no words or anything like that, just usually sometimes a rock near the head. But that's it. It's very, you know, it's very discreet, but sometimes a tree. And the trees always grow, and I'm talking very, very dry landscape, and it's obviously the moisture in the ground from the decomposition. But you find that lots of things do that. I mean, there was traditions in North America of North American Indians planting a fish under corn, and you know, then animals underneath fruit trees go very well, and often, you know, I know many properties where, you know, when they dig holes ready for the animals that don't make it, and they've got avenues of, you know, trees grown on dead chooks and different things like that. Will interplanted eucalypts and pines coexist peacefully? I've seen a windbreak. Hedgerows are something I've taken a lot of photographs as well. Interest in hedgerows are a slideshow. Photographed a lot of interest in hedgerows, and New Zealand has a lot of interest in hedgerows. Spiny hedgerows is something I've taken a lot of photographs of. I'm interested in spiky hedgerows, hostile hedgerows. But in New Zealand, I've got a photograph of a eucalypt, pine tree, one row of eucalypts, one row of pine trees, one row of bamboo. Hedgerow. So in some cases, yeah, it probably depends on which pine tree and which eucalypt. But there would be, you know, there is potential allelopathy there with the acidity of the pines and the oil exudates off the roots of the eucalypt. Things don't grow around it. You know, it doesn't encourage growth around it. As it's a negative. You know, the positive, negative, no effect. It's a negative, often. But then you do see, you know, in rows in windbreaks. And then there are, and when we say pine, it's a general term. So if we're talking hoop pines do grow with eucalypts and naturally coexist with eucalypts. And, you know, Kauri pine, which is an agathis. Agathis robusta is the Australian Kauri pine. Agathis australis is the New Zealand Kauri pine. Tane Mahutu, god of the forest to the Maori. And then you get beautiful things like plum pine. Podocarpus alatus is an edible fruit pine of Australia. And there's one just here in the university grounds. Keep walking past it. I'm not making a comment, but I am noticing it. And I didn't even know they grew that far south, but they do. And bunya pine, which also grows down here. Seen them in Melbourne. Saw a bunya pine in Cairo Botanical Garden, didn't we, Nadia? 2 walked round the corner in Cairo Botanical Garden, right near Giza, in the middle of the city it is now, and there's a bunya pine. And the botanist who's given me a tour, because often if you go in as somebody representing permaculture, they'll give you a guided tour or something. And I said, oh, bunya pine, wow. You know, I said, great edible food. And he said, no, you can't eat them. I said, you can't eat them. Of course you can eat them. And they said, no, it's not edible. It was planted in 1875. It's a big one, a couple of big ones. They've got a carry pine there, but there's 2 bunya pines. And they've been dropping edible nuts for, 125 years, just about. And nobody in Cairo knows you can eat them. It's kind of interesting. You feel like you're seeing your mates in lots of different places.
Which part of the food?
Sorry?
Have you eaten them?
It's a huge pine cone that comes down.
But which bit of it do you eat?
The seed. Right, it has up to 20 kilos of ball of nut that drops off, and inside is like a large chestnut. And the monkey puzzle pine from Chile is a related species when Gondwana was connected, and is the staple food of the Chilean Indians in the mountains there, and is a smaller version of the same thing. But huge festivals by the Aboriginal people with bunya pines traditionally. Okay. Can we use geographic observation and overlay the fractal patterns of river systems to help identify the key points for resurfaced groundwater, i.e. springs? Probably. You don't need to for the key points. You can see the key points. You can see every single key point on a contour map. No problem at all. Every single contour map, you'll see the key point. Not a problem. The interesting thing is when you see water come out from a sort of spring that's been forced by swaling uphill or working from the key point down, often it's kind of unusual. There's already a damp look to the ground and you don't recognise it. And when the water comes out, you look and you think, oh, I can see the pattern of the plants now. It's like one of those pictures that you can't see until you actually get shown the image. And when the water comes out, it's kind of like, oh, now I believe it is a wet spot. I've had that quite a few times, and it's almost like, why didn't I see it before? Why didn't I believe my eyes that I was seeing already plants that were indicating more moisture? But when the water comes out, it then becomes very obvious. Outside of that, I really don't know if there is those sort of overlays. But with the amount of layered mapping we can do today, I don't see why that wouldn't be a useful thing to try and research. For those people who are sort of in positions, and that's where they want to be, inside a sort of, layered mapping system. Personally, I prefer to be out there, trying it on.
Well, that's why I mentioned geographical observation, because if you are, say, out there wanting to maybe purchase land to set up one of these systems we're talking about, we could look at the landscape and go, well, I'm putting all of this information together with my observations, and you might not have to go to, you can identify these features that could give you the indication that, yes, I've got shallow groundwater, which might be beneficial, or spring water, I should refer to.
Yeah, shallow groundwater you usually pick up with the species of trees stuff. Spring water, yeah, you kind of go on the reputation around the place. Otherwise, you just start, stacking in your design. And luckily, we can get a little bit braver all the time. I think we're still really, not far off the tip of the iceberg. We've still got a long way to go in understanding what we can do. We know we're moving in the positive, that's for sure. I just drew that up quickly. If that's a ridge line, that's a falling ridge line there. because that's 35, 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, as in some sort of measurement on a contour map. And you're looking at, from the ridgeline, you're looking down the valley there. There's the start of a valley. When you see the contour lines widen like that, that's the key point there. Wherever, whether you go up from the bottom, or if you can see the indentation start from the ridgeline, there's the start of the ridgeline. There's the ridgeline, there's the start of the valley, where the valleys are you'll always see this, the contours are close together, and the first widen at the top of the valley, there's the key point. You can see it ever so easy on a contour map. There's many things we probably don't even need to think about that much. You know, just, in temperate climates, I couldn't live in a temperate climate without an attached glasshouse on a house, I don't think. You know, I'd feel a bit uncomfortable about that. I'd keep asking myself why I hadn't got one, and why I was using other sort of, pollutant powers to heat myself, or creating myself so much work to heat myself, when I could just have a solar pump run off a glasshouse so simply. I couldn't live without it for very long anyway, without just getting out there and building myself an attached glasshouse. And then when I see other buildings, I see enormous opportunities to do that. And where you come across buildings that have attached glasshouses in the cool or temperate climates, they're just so lovely, they're so comfortable, they're great. It makes the house feel like a sort of subtropical house with an inside-outside open space feeling, and so much extra sort of inside-outside vegetation. It's funny to work I did some work in England in some of the stately homes, trying to retrofit stately homes. And at the time there was 98 stately homes in England, and there was only 5 of them turning a profit. And they couldn't be, they were all built at times of enormous amounts of fossil fuel and lots of slavery. And people are very sentimental about these stately homes, and so they don't want them to change. Often they have great walled gardens. If you go out in the back, there's an 18th century walled kitchen garden that's kind of really funky. I've got some slideshows of those too, with nice round glass houses with old boilers underneath. They're kind of neat. They're some good, what are the name of the fruit trees up against walls? Espalier. Great espalier fruit trees. But when you look around these old stately homes, they have really high ceilings as high as this room in a cold climate. And originally had lots of servants and coal and cheap energy. I consider them tributes to servitude. They're not something we should honour at all. Why should we honour something that's stupid, that enslaved people? I thought they were quite nuts. I mean, why do this? And 98%, 98 of them, only 5 of them turning a profit. I said, we get the 93 that aren't turning a profit, let's dismantle them really carefully. Right? And they've got these great materials, great big oak beams, huge great doors, slate roofs, fantastic stuff they're made out of, great big stones, and reassemble them, right, as energy efficient, solar aspect, eco-hamlets. Right? Using the same material and a few extras, and demonstrate what we can do with something that once was really bad. They didn't go for it. I thought they were going to lynch me. But I thought it was a great idea. I thought it was a much better tribute to sensible design, and get rid of that thing that's a tribute to servitude and slavery and bad use of fuel. Can you mix, I don't know about this one, can you mix water, vinegar and water to make slightly acid water to use on indoor plants? Anybody ever done that?
Yeah, I've heard it.
Yeah? There you go. Yes?
Just need a very little. Be careful, don't get too acid.
Yeah. Could do a pH test on it and see what sort of pH you had, I suppose. That's the easy way to do it. If you want something to be a little bit more acid, a little bit of flowers of sulphur is extremely cheap and a natural element. Or a little bit of pine needle mulch. You got strawberries or blueberries or azaleas that aren't growing that well. You can bet it's not acid enough. Use thick pine needle mulch or the humus underneath pine needle mulch, and you'll find it's a little bit acid, and they'll really like it. Yeah?
Why would you want to do that?
Because they like acid. You've obviously got plants that like acid, or you've got a calcium-based potting mix or something.
Like in Central Texas, we have limestone, so we have alkaline water, tap water.
Yeah. That's why you did it, was it? There you go. An alkaline-based water answer from Texas. This is a yes, definitely. Were Hawaiians such game players because their system gave them such a lot of leisure time? Yes, that's the same for all people. Hopefully that's the same for you. Except you've got to use your leisure time to extend permaculture throughout the world before it all dies. Right? That's the only leisure time you've got from now on, okay? Everything else is a waste of bloody time, right? Yeah, there's lots of situations like that. There's some wonderful ones, really nice things. And traditional people often wore the same thing. They didn't have fashion, which is another stupid thing, They all wore the same stuff. They wore a tribal sort of dress. The women wore one thing, the men wore another thing. You could still tell the ones who are a bit snappy. They've got a way of wearing it that's sort of, a bit showier. Got a bit of style to it. And there's all kinds of nice traditions, lovely ones. Like there's Thailand. In Thailand, there's up in the hill country, when they're planning out the crops, the men go along going one way, or the adolescent boys, young men, go along one way with a planting stick, putting holes in on contour, and the adolescent girls go the other way, dropping the seeds in. So you just get a chance to say, hi, how you going? You look all right, Yeah. And that's about it, and then you've got to make sure you've got the right, and everything's done with great, dignity, humility, and things that are taken very seriously. You have time to develop permanence within culture, and you're taking all those family, community, tribal things seriously and not lightly. You're taking things on as you should. You have time to sing and dance and ceremony and understand your traditions, understand your totem, understand your culture, and keep it refined and clear. And that is what moderates your population. That's what does it. That's what stops you, absolute abundance in culture, in production, in landscape. That's what keeps you in a sensible population regime. That's a really nice yes on that one. Marula trees in Kotab. I think it might be too damp. I think it might. You might be able to create a microclimate that was a bit dry. Marula is the desert tree of the Kalahari. So it's probably a desert tree. When I've tried to grow desert trees in wet climates, they often don't make it with mould and fungus. Argan trees of Morocco, which is one of the classic desert trees of the world, the argan tree only grows where the Berber people are. Argania, what a tree.
Would it work in the temperate areas?
It might be, you often find these things are specific to that climate, incredibly well drained, dry, no humidity, particular temperature. Some things are very specific to temperature, like kiwi fruit doesn't fruit unless you have 600 hours under 11 degrees. So where I live in northern New South Wales, you've got to be at the bottom of the valleys, otherwise you don't have enough extended chill. Date palms don't fruit well unless you get 2 months over 40 degrees. All these things are pretty well documented, and you can Google them. So we could Google marula trees and see if we get it up and what it is and what its requirements are. Somebody out there stacked it on the web, which is great now. You know, it saves you going through miles of libraries. We're out of time.